for me, the whole process, the book writing, the whole process to me is an art. I don't really consider myself an author so much as I'm an artist. So
right.
Not only is every word I put in the book, the way they're putting the book, how I end the book, the way it's structured, the cover, everything is my artwork. It's mine, and I want to own it. And if people say, well, I'm not going to buy that, that's crap. Okay, well, I guess I would like to sell the books, but ultimately, artists don't paint paintings to necessarily make money. They paint them because they have to express themselves. And so I have to express myself, and I'm going to express it through writing books. And if people end up buying them, that's great.
What up, folks? What's going on? Welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the only podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 196 of the Spun Today Podcast, and in this episode, we have a guest joining us, Mr. Roderick Edwards. Roderick is a fellow author who has written and published 13 books. He writes both fiction and nonfiction across several different genres. And during our conversation, we got to speak about the inspiration behind a lot of those stories, as well as the background and sequence of events that led to writing some of those books. One of my favorites that I'll give away here in the intro is that he, and I might butcher this a little bit, but definitely stick around to listen to the episode. I'm paraphrasing from memory. He has a friend that purchases things at auction. And Roderick, as you'll learn, is a history buff. One of the things his friend purchased was a steam chest that was filled with pretty much the remnants of the life of a World War II veteran. And he wound up getting that over to Roderick to see if he'd be interested to, dig around and see if he can come up with something from all this stuff of this person that has since passed. And Roderick wound up, finding out one day he's a World War II veteran and has written 2 out of a planned 3-book series on this individual's life, who had a fascinating life. In the first book, which is Should Have Been With Me, speaks about this gentleman who was in World War II. In the second book in the series, which is The Up Perspective, he focuses more on this fascinating story of after he came back from the war, he got involved in, I believe it was engineering, and wound up helping develop some of the first satellites that the U.S. sent into orbit. And it was just like a fascinating sequence of events with a bunch of like coincidences along the way that I won't spoil for you guys. That was pretty much, in my estimation, the universe conspiring to make sure that these books get written. And I thought it was a very cool story. Roderick also had what I guess would be considered by most a non-conventional upbringing, where he overcame almost certain death at birth. He wound up being adopted at 4 years old, and many, many decades later, wound up tracking down his birth family at the age of 50. And we go through that whole journey with him. And it was a really cool conversation. We also spoke about his unique writing process. Roderick reached out to me on Twitter. I believe he said he saw, perhaps like following a time travel hashtag or something like that, one of my posts to my novel FRACTAL, and he himself wrote his first fiction, which has a really cool backstory as well, which I won't spoil for you guys. His first fiction is a time travel story, and we wound up connecting on Twitter that way. He reached out, and we wound up scheduling to record, I think within a week or two. And like we briefly mentioned on the show, it's a fascinating time that we live in, where we have opportunities like this where people, living in different states or pretty much at any 2 different points on the globe can, come together with the technologies that we have nowadays. And you can have, 2 perfect strangers that otherwise either wouldn't have met or may not have ever sat down to speak with each other, where they can come together and speak and get to know each other and share, these common interests, and then broadcast that out to all of you that will be able to listen to this conversation and get different things from it in perpetuity. And it would be a shame not to take advantage of the opportunity of living in this day and age by doing things like this. So I just want to extend another thank you to Roderick for coming on the show, on the Spun Today podcast. I really appreciate your time. Folks can follow Roderick on Twitter at Roderick, RODERICKEDOTCOM. That's at roderick.com, spelled out. His website is Roderick, RODERICKE.com. Roderick E for Edwards.com. And all of his books are available in all the different formats: digital, paperback, hardcover, and audiobooks. You can find them all on Amazon as well as on his website. I will link to his Amazon page as well as his website and his Twitter handle in the episode notes, as always, to make it easier for you fine folks to get in touch. And before we get into the episode, here is a quick way that you can help support the Spun Today podcast if you so choose. And you so choosing helps me keep the lights on and helps me free up time to create more content. It's a win-win. And after this, we'll jump right into the episode. You can support the Spun Today podcast by checking out my writing. You can go to spuntoday.com/free writing and check out some of my free association writing, which is intended to be some cathartic free writing, but oftentimes doubles down as motivation for myself and others. At spuntoday.com/short stories, you can read a bunch of the different short stories that I've written and actually listen to the audiobook versions of those short stories there as well. Another way you can help support my writing is by going to spuntoday.com/books and checking out what I have in store for sale. Digital copies are available in all formats, whether it be Kindle, iBooks, or a different type of e-reader. You can also purchase paperback copies if that's your preferred reading method. Currently available, I have my nonfiction, Make Way for You, which is a collection of freely written thoughts that were curated and put together as tips for getting out of your own way. Also available is my debut time travel novel titled FRACTAL. Again, go to spuntoday.com/books to show your support. All right, folks, we have an absolute treat today on the Spun Today podcast. We have author Roderick Edwards. Roderick is the writer of 13 books, available now in all digital formats, in print, in audiobook versions, and some even translated into Spanish. Most of his work falls under the umbrella of nonfiction, but within multiple genres, like The Universe, which is a philosophical work, The Up Perspective, which is a biography on a World War II cargo pilot that helped design and launch amongst the first U.S. satellites into space, and About Preterism, which is a theological view on a movement called Preterism, and many more. His debut fiction is The Clipbook Time Finder, and Roderick's website is Roderick, RODERICKE.com, which I will link to in the episode notes, and folks listening can follow him on Twitter at roderick.dot.com. But first and foremost, I just want to say thank you very much for reaching out, Roderick, and for taking the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you much for the opportunity that authors can interact with you on your show as well.
Absolutely. I get as much from it as listeners do, and it's an awesome exchange. It's a interesting age and time that we live in that we even have the capabilities to do so. Me, I'm in New York right now. I know you are in the East Coast as well. I don't want to say your location.
Yep, Florida. Okay. Yeah, Florida's fine. I don't think anybody's going to find me. I'm in the middle of a 450,000 acre wood.
Okay.
So there's no way they're going to find me. So if we lose connection, that's going to be the reason why.
Gotcha. All right, Rod. So I wanted to begin with your upbringing because as we spoke about offline when we were emailing back and forth, you mentioned that you were adopted at the age of 4 and you wound up finding your birth family at the age of 50. And one of the things I like to do on the show is when I have a guest on is take a deep dive into them and who they are and, what they're into, not just stick to the topic of writing, although we can definitely do that. But if you want to walk us through that process, that sounds really fascinating to me.
Sure. I've had this conversation with people before. There's no questions you want to ask or could ask that's going to be offensive, so fire away. But let me start here. So when I was born, I had medical issues and was left at the hospital. My mother actually thought I wasn't going to survive. I was left basically to die. And I did survive. Apparently, here I am. And it took a few years to patch me up and get everything working again, and so it wasn't until age 4 when I was finally adopted. By the time I was age 7, even the adoptive family broke up and divorced and such. So it didn't turn out happily ever after, at least not then. And like you said, we'll fast forward to age 50 is when in Indiana they opened up the records where if you submitted some information, you could actually get access to your records. And I found out that my birth mother and birth father had deceased, so that immediately let me get all my records. And that'll let me find out I had like 4 or 5 half siblings and one 100% sibling by the same mother and father who's also given up for adoption at birth. So it's really that's really, really amazing story right in itself. So
yeah, absolutely. And you were born in Indiana?
I was born in Indiana, yes.
Okay, and your birth
Indianapolis
family
specifically.
And actually, let me just take it a step back. You said up until age 4, you were like in the hospital the entire time before getting adopted?
I don't remember much, but I was in the hospital and foster care. I guess when I was first adopted, I used to talk about farms and corn, but I don't remember anything about that. So I guess I must have lived on a farm at some point, but I don't recall it.
Gotcha. And do you speak about like the types of birth issues that you had, or?
Yeah, I had. I don't remember what they call it. It's a gastro something other. Basically, it means that your insides are on the outside. So they had to patch that all up.
Oh wow!
Basically, your intestines and everything. So, and once that's fixed, I was good to go. But I was still probably scrawny looking. It took a while for somebody to adopt me. So.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that your birth parents left you at the hospital, and they thought that you were going to die. Did they leave you because they thought you were going to die? Is that like the process then, or did they just leave you up to adopt you if you did get better?
No, I think they assumed I died because even when I finally contacted the birth family, they also thought I was either dead or that I was in some kind of facility somewhere completely out of it. Because the way it was described to them, I didn't have much a chance to live. Again, mother was pretty young and probably thought, wow, this is a tragedy here. I can't even watch it, can't even look at it. I mean, I'd imagine if you'd seen a baby first born and you're expecting this cute little thing coming out and instead you see all these guts hanging out of the baby, that would be terrifying to a young mother. So
yeah, absolutely.
The father wasn't around at the time, but the mother definitely was afraid and didn't have the capacity. I don't hold any grudges. I don't know her because I didn't meet her, but I don't have any grudges against her because that had been a scary situation. And she did what best she could, is probably letting me remain in the hospital. So. Absolutely.
And I mean, I have 2 young kids, and I can't even wrap my head around that. That must have been terrifying from her perspective. And you had a brother as well. Like you said, one full brother. Did he have birth issues?
No, actually, again, we're talking about the book. Talking about a little bit about a book. I wrote an autobiography about it called Together More. It doesn't touch on every little aspect of my life, but a little bit about that adoption. So maybe you're looking at the picture on the front of the book, and there's actually 2 brothers, and those are from the mother's side, but they had different mothers, or different fathers rather. And no, as far as I know, they were born fine, and then they stayed with the mother for the most part.
Gotcha.
And then I had another brother by the father, and he's fine too, and he's somewhere else. So.
And do you have relationships now with any of the siblings?
Yes, when I located them at age 50. Now this story is even interesting if you'd like to hear it real briefly. So at age 50, I sent away for the information, didn't expect anything about it. I think it's 2017 when this happened or so, 2018, somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly the exact date. But anyhow, I finally get the information back, and here's this letter that may have my history. Who am I? My heritage. So finally you get to be who you are. Because adoptees, if you don't think about it, adoptees don't know who we are. We really don't. We don't have any heritage. We create it, or we adopt somebody else's heritage. Whoever adopted us, we're no one. So in a way, it's worse than being, people talk about minorities being oppressed and such, but when you have no heritage at all, I mean, you have nothing to point to. That's even worse.
Yeah, it's a deep.
So anyhow, I get this letter back. Right. So I get this letter back, and oddly enough, at the time I get this letter back, I was going to a rally for a presidential candidate. I won't mention that because we're trying not to stay out of politics. But I was going to this rally, but I didn't open the letter because I didn't have much time. So I left the letter on the table and went to this rally. But the whole time at this rally, as this man is basically going to be the leader of the free world, or was the leader, I can't remember if he already was president or not, but he seemed so small in that instant because all I'm thinking about what does that letter say?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the whole time I'm waiting at this rally for 2-3 hours, I'm thinking about something else. So when I get home and I open this letter, there's my mother's name, my birth mother's name. I didn't have a name at birth. She didn't give me one. It was just male Luttrell, my last name was at the time, her name. And so that started it, and fortunately we're in the internet age, and my previous employment was an analyst, so I had a lot of experience on looking at data and figuring things out and research. So I used all the ancestry websites and everything else and found out she was dead, he was dead. Actually, I didn't know about him yet, I'm sorry, but she was dead. All her siblings were dead, so I'm like, oh, this is going to be a dead end. But I found out she had 2 children. And within the next day, I had located those children via Facebook and contacted them and eventually contacted one of the half-sisters who basically talked to me and came to see me within 2 days, her and one of their brothers.
Oh, wow.
So within 2 days, my life completely changes dramatically. All this information coming to me at once, so
that must have been overwhelming. Yeah, exactly. And they were, if they came to see you within 2 days, they were like instantly responsive.
Yeah, and they're local. Yeah, and they were local, and they were immediately responsive. They were surprised because again, they thought I had died. So one of the first things the sister said to me, the half sister who actually called me on the phone that night or the night after, she said, "Is Renee with you?" And I was like, "Who's Renee? I don't know anything about a Renee." This was the other person that was given up for adoption 2 years before me. My other sister, who is my 100% sibling. I didn't know anything about her. I was like, what? We have another sister? Yeah, we thought she was with you. She said, no, I don't know anything about her. Neither did they. All they knew is that she was adopted out. They didn't know where she was. They didn't know anything about her. So then we'll get further in the story, but just a little prelude is then I took it upon myself to find her. I even had to hire a private investigator because there was nobody had any information about her. So I had to look for her.
And how did that process go? Did you, I guess, spoiler alert?
Well,
did you
first I figured out. Well, we'll leave a little suspense for a moment. So what I did first is I used my skills of a data analyst and my ability to research and all these stuff, and I was looking all over the internet, putting in because I had her birth date because it says on the birth certificate, my birth certificate, it says previous child born on blah blah date. So now I had her birth date because it's telling me it wasn't any of the existing children I knew about, so it had been this missing child.
Right.
I put all that in there, couldn't find her. Finally, I hear about this thing called confidential intermediaries. These are private investigators for adoptees, basically is what they are. At first, I was like, I don't want to hire somebody. This is going to be a fraud. They're going to take my money, and they're going to say they can't find her, and then I'm just waste my money. Finally, I took the $700 or $800 or what it was and put the money forward. Like, okay, if it's a fraud, it's a fraud. I'll just leave it out the money. But within 2 weeks, they located her. The problem I was having was because she had the wrong birth date. Somebody had this is pretty common back then, somebody had changed her birth date to make it look like she was born on a different date, so it would be difficult to find her. So it was just off by like 1 day, but I couldn't find her by that birth date. And her name was changed as well. So, but yeah, the private investigator did find her, and within 30 days, her and I struck up a relationship and discussions and everything else. So.
Wow. And do you still stay in touch with her now? Did that turn out?
I am living in Florida with her in her house, our house now, I guess. That's a whole other story.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That can add
so the stories just keep on coming. That's the reason why we have 13 books, because these stories just keep on coming. This is just one little side story we're talking about right now.
Especially once you're looking at things through that writer lens, where everything becomes a story. Every anecdote becomes its own, vein.
Right.
So,
right.
Let me take it a step back before you finding your birth family. Growing up, how was your childhood like? Were you like always into like reading? Were you into writing as a child?
Yeah, oddly enough, I mean, because I know we all understand this, that people are born with two parts to them. One, or born or raised, what do you want to call it? It's called the nurture-nature concept. So there's some parts that's hardwired into you. No matter what happens to you, that's just who you are. And there's other parts you're influenced by the way your upbringing is, or your peers and all that stuff. Obviously, adoptees, it's even more stark because you're in a family that nobody's biologically related to you. So you can see the differences in yourself compared to them. So one of the major differences that I noticed is that I did love reading to the point where when I used to cut school, I would go to the library and get books. That's the reason I'd cut school, because I wanted to learn more, but I didn't want to learn what they were teaching me in schools. I mean, I'm the epitome of the nerd, if that's the case. So.
Yeah.
So I went to get history books and all kinds of books like that. So I was into that even back then when I was, I didn't really cut school until the high school, but that's when I did it. So.
Right, and it's usually that's usually like the opposite reason why high school kids cut school to go
right. Usually
more.
cut school to do things that get in trouble and cause trouble. But I would cut school, go to the library, get books, and then in my area there was this place called the Swamp. It was basically this undeveloped land with a couple ponds there, and I would just go and hide in the bushes and read all these history books, and I mean direct history books that are like written in the 1800s, not those boring history books is what I'm talking about.
Right. like first person.
So, right.
So circling back to around the same time period, you're in high school, cutting school to go read. Were you writing already at that point, or not yet?
I would always, as far as I can tell, I've always written as soon as I can pick up a pen, but they would just be journals and stuff. I never had a concept where, say, I'm going to become a writer and publish things.
Right.
I just kept them in my. They weren't diaries so much as they were journals. Sometimes they were just big, long, drawn out. It wouldn't even be about me. It'd just be about thoughts that I might have or this idea came across and such like that. So it wasn't really a diary. But yes, I've kept those since I can remember.
Kind of like free association writing, like free writing.
Yeah, I think that's probably what they called it then.
Okay, nice.
Before it was.
I actually do a lot of that myself. I've published both nonfiction and fiction, and my nonfiction is a collection of free writing, free association writing. That like the through line is, has like a motivational pick yourself up and do what it is that you want to do, like get out of your own way type of through line to it. Which I noticed while like reading through my own free writing, I noticed that trend, through like a bunch of different notebooks, and I realized that I was kind of like talking to myself, but like through the writing, and I'm like, oh hey, this, and it is like motivating me to figure out the self-publishing process and put that book out. And my mindset with it was essentially, if this helped me do that, maybe it'll help somebody else as well,
Right, it's self-therapy and cathartic. So I mean, we definitely there was a lot of that going on early on, and I'm still doing some of that. I'm sure. Maybe I don't recognize it so much, but it's there. So
absolutely, it's definitely helpful. Like you said, you hit it on the nose. It's definitely cathartic and therapeutic. Now, so tell me about. I really wanted to ask you about the biography of the World War II cargo pilot, just in terms of like how that relationship happened. The name of the book again is The Up Perspective, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the first one in that series actually was called Should Have Been With Me. The Up Perspective was the second one, and then actually writing a third one called the Tentmate, which is the final three in the series. But what this is a, like I said, World War II cargo pilot. He's from Eaton, Indiana, some little small town. He flew over the Himalayas. They call it the Hump. I think they made several movies about it and such. In C-47 cargo planes, basically dropping cargo down to the advancing troops into China and such like that. In Japan, actually, China is where they're fighting, but they're not fighting the Chinese if you know history. But so he comes back, and then he starts developing the first satellites that the U.S. launched into space when there was a big space race between the Soviets, the Russians.
The whole Sputnik.
And so So I detail all that and how that came about. Why am I writing about this? Because I'm typically, at this point, I'm usually writing nonfiction autobiographies and philosophical books, and that one about the religion that you mentioned here. How did I get into these biography books? I have a friend that goes to auctions, and so he went to this auction probably 20, 30 years ago and found all this material by this man that I write in the book. His name's Wilfred Skull. He's deceased now. But he finds all this material, all his old records and pictures and all this stuff from the war. And he finally, 20 years later, after he meets me, he's like, hey, you're beginning to write books. Do you want to maybe look at this material and see if you can do something with it? So he drives it all the way down to Florida, all the way from Indiana, in this big, steam chest where all this stuff has it. And that's what the front of the book Should Have Been Me is. It's the steam chest. It's the war chest that he has.
Gotcha.
But anyhow, so I go through all this and try to see if there's some kind of cohesive story, and I find out all these weird connections that this guy who was Eaton, Indiana, and all these other things, and even the place that this guy met me at, the friend from Indiana, we came down and he met me in a restaurant called Eaton Beach. So, like, all these weird connections that, like, what in the world is going on here?
It's like
when
the universe conspires to say, hey, yes, you should write this.
Yes, and that's exactly what was going on. That was exactly what was going on. And what's different, this guy, the World War veteran, he didn't have any children. He died when he didn't produce any children. So his legacy and the story, everything about it would have gone with him. His wife, 94-year-old woman, didn't know what to do with all these pictures, so she gave them away and they sold them at auction.
Wow.
And fortunately, we brought them back and turned them into a book. I contacted her later and then gave her books, and her children, because she had children by another husband previously, her children came to the book signing that I held eventually in Eaton, Indiana, because I took the book and went back to Eaton, Indiana, to where he was from, and held a big book signing there.
Oh, so, that's great.
And then we continued on the story and wrote more about the fact that he was not only just in the war, but he came back and was, the perspective is more about his time as being the satellite engineer. And then the last book I'm currently working on, which should be out before Christmas, is called Tentmate. It's about the 4 guys, him and 3 other guys that stayed inside this tent in Moran, India, and experiences they had and coming back and how their lives diverged and where they were from. It's just a little bit about humanity in general. So,
gotcha. Wow, that's definitely a fascinating series right there. Now,
I don't think it's important that we keep that somewhere. We especially from a guy who didn't have any children. I call his satellites his children because he didn't have any children. Put out 6 satellites. It's called the OGO satellites, and one of them just crashed. I think it was in 2018. He's been up in space since the late 60s, I think, and maybe early 60s. All that time, just going around and around, and finally crashed. Shortly after I published the first book, I was like, "There's too many weird connections here."
Oh man!
Which led to the book, which you'll get to, is the universe.
Gotcha. Before we get to that one though, you are able to, I guess, like maybe like through like a NASA website or something like that, to track like the satellites, like their positionings, or like if they're still active or not.
Yeah, there's different places you can go, but this was an actual story that I had come across the news thing that the OGO satellite's coming down. I was like, OGO, what? Wait a minute, this is the guy who created these satellites. They were called the orbital geopositional satellites, something like that, because they were just mapping positions at the time. They weren't really as advanced as we have now. And there's just a news story about how they were gonna force it crash landing into the ocean by Maui. It's like, wow, this is the guy's actual satellites. His babies are coming home. The last one. He created like 6 of them, and the first one, for some reason, stayed in space longer than the other ones.
Wow. And it is pretty cool that you were able to create that work to like live on forever. You know what I mean? Like you said,
now hopefully it lives on forever. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And how does that bleed into the universe? Because
I think the universe might have been written before. It might have been written before. So the universe was gone back a little bit. It probably started from, or was the premise from it. What's the word I'm looking for here? I don't know. I'm an author and I'm at a loss for words, really. Whatever. The catalyst. There we go. The catalyst that caused it. There we go. That caused the universe was how everything was coming together in my reunion with my birth family, and how all this stuff was coming. Because there's more stories than that. We won't have so much time, but there's a lot of things here that came together. And so the universe is about what I call apparent coincidences. We all have them where there's just too many things that stack up. You're like, okay, I'm not a superstitious person. Maybe you're not a religious person, but there's so many things that stack up that you're saying these are all coincidences, but they all stack up and they keep pointing to this one thing. Well, that's what the universe is about. And I'm not actually telling you it even exists. I'm just saying we should look at this. It's strange. That's all basically the universe, the book itself, is about. It's not dictating to anybody what to believe or not believe. It's just saying this is strange.
Right. And like I always go by the trope of, some things exist whether you believe in them or not. And just to everything should be looked at and studied and contemplated and not just shunned away,
Right. Everything is valid until you've somehow found enough evidence to show that's no longer valid. Like somebody comes to you and says, this tree is God. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? And then you unpack it some more, and then if they literally mean like Mickey Mouse or the tree is God, then maybe you can dispute that. But every claim is valid until it's disputed and unpacked. So
right, exactly. Well said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, preterism. While we're like on the tangentially on the topic of religion, tell me about that. Were you into? Did you grow up within like that movement or that religion?
No, and here's what happens. So preterism is a theological concept that believes, not to get too deep here, I don't know how deep we want to get. I started writing this book before any of these other books, but I kept on pushing it off because it was just boring me. I was halfway done with it, but I was like, I need to finish it. I already committed so much time to it. But basically, it's the theological belief that Jesus already came back and there's not going to be a world-ending apocalypse, cataclysm. They get that from the fact that if you've watched any of the Left Behind movies or anything like that, they always talk about wars and rumors of wars and all these things that are going to happen, and it's going to be precursors to Jesus coming back and the final destruction of man and saving of some men. But these people would believe the Bible that says that something to the effect that these things already happened, and Jesus was predicting the end of the Jewish temple in the year AD 70, which actually literally happened to me, if you're just a historian. So I'm going through this whole detail on how these people believe this and why they believe this, and how one of their people even assassinated James Garfield in the 1800s, the President James Garfield.
Oh, wow.
Because he wanted to promote this belief. He figured if he killed the president, he'd become famous, and people would read his book about preterism. So, it has deeper connections. So people are, what? This is weird. Why would you even write about this? Because
it's definitely interesting.
It's bigger into our face. Yeah, we don't realize it's actually more into our face than we realize. It's not just this little side view. It's actually impacted the United States by having a president over it. So I was into at least studying it for a while. I did call myself a preterist for a while, so it's a theological belief. I'm not certain where I even stand on any religion now. I've moved so far away from certain things, but at the time, yes, definitely I would consider myself a preterist. And that way, the book is from an inside-out perspective. So there's no doubt I'm not just documenting. I'm actually can tell you from the inside out what was going on.
Gotcha. And so, what is the like most religions have like their, I don't know if it would be correct to call it a theory, but their idea of an afterlife. Does preterism have that in, or do they not, because they think everything within the Bible already happened? They
do, and so that version, there's different ologies they call them, studies of, and in this case it's called eschatology. It's the study of the end times, which includes the afterlife. And so a lot of preterists will say that we're in heaven now. Basically, there was never supposed to be some world-ending event. Instead, you basically just kind of translate that physical death right into either heaven or hell. Someplace, a lot of preterists don't even believe in hell. They say that you basically there is no hell. Either everybody goes to heaven, it's sorted out there, or anybody who is destined for hell is just completely destroyed. There's no eternal punishment. It just ends for them. So yeah, they do have a concept of the afterlife.
Gotcha. And it's more like heaven on earth.
Yeah, heaven on earth, and somehow I don't know how they get it, but somehow heaven and earth overlap. Let's call it that.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Even Christianity in general has it. It talks about the New Jerusalem coming down and such and such and such. So, not to get too far off field. Hopefully, we didn't lose too many listeners here.
No, it's fine. This conversation is for you and me. No worries.
Again, I'm a multi-genre author, so I go from the autobiography to the biography to the philosophy to the religion. So yeah, if you don't like one thing I'm writing, look for something else.
Absolutely, and I love that.
That written.
I love that. I hate when people are try to pigeonhole authors, or just people in general. We're all multifaceted, and we're into different things. Yeah. I might be into outer space, and also playing pool, and also podcasts, and also writing, and also what I mean.
There you go. Don't become a Patrick Stewart, because you'll always be Jean-Luc Picard.
Yeah, exactly.
No matter what you do, you're always going to be him.
Right. Don't typecast yourself.
Yep, exactly.
Now, going back to writing, I wanted to ask you a bit about your process. Do you write pen to paper? Do you use a specific writing program?
I purposely... Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just gonna follow that up with if you have a writing schedule or any writing rituals.
Perfect. So when I got into actually trying to publish something, just like your podcast, I purposely have not listened. I listened a little bit to your podcast, but I purposely try not to listen to podcasts before I go on, because I want to experience what it's like from the podcast person, the host, rather than get some preconceived idea of what it might be like and what it's going to be. So same thing with my writing. I try not to read a lot of things so I don't sound like this person or that person. I do have influences apparently, but I try not to try to sound like so. My process might be different than most authors. For example, I live on almost a 2-acre property here in the middle, like I said, in the forest. I have chickens and I live on a 17-acre lake and dogs. And so what I do to get ready to write is I don't sit down at a computer. I don't write on a piece of paper. I go out and feed the chickens, and I start thinking about stuff and things like that. And eventually I'll come in. Once I have enough content in my mind, then I start writing that down. But I don't keep on forcing it. I don't say, I got to sit down today and I got to write 4 hours worth of content. Instead, whenever I'm done, I'm done. That way all the content is full and ready for the reader to absorb, and it's not forced or a lot of words that a lot of times, like, for example, we were talking about religion. If you've ever been to a church and you'll hear somebody praying, "Dear Lord," and "God, please," and they cut out 15% of that. The prayer is 2 seconds, really. So right. The same thing here is I'm trying to make sure that the content, even though my books are really short, and I purposely keep them to about under 200 pages, the content from every page is really thick. So
nice. Okay. Like
there's no process really. It's just
get to the point and cut the fluff.
Right.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, there's definitely something for that to be said for that in terms of just letting it come to you, letting the muse, as they say, come to you.
Right. And now also people might think, well, now it's going to sound like it's just a boring lecture book of facts. No, it's not that. It's not necessarily about facts. I mean, because a philosophy book is definitely not facts. But it is making sure that there's not a bunch of filler in between those segments of those ideas that you're getting to in the book.
Right. And what do you do as far as, so you're mulling things over, you're walking around your property, feeding the chickens, you come back, you start writing. When you actually start writing, is it on the computer or is it like on paper first or?
Yeah, it's on the computer. I bought some journals because back when I was younger, everything was written. I hand wrote it, and I took my time to make sure my writing, even the way I wrote things, the curve of my letters and stuff meant something to me. So it was very important.
Right.
But now it's basically on the computer because it's just so much time left in my life to get it out there. So it's usually that way. Now it's on the Word. I used to use MS Word, Microsoft Word. So
gotcha. And I do both. I do when I do free writing. I still like pen to paper. I like collecting books with different cool covers, and like that within itself, like I guess is like a hobby. Just collecting different style notebooks and stuff. And I fill those up with like free writing. And then the ones that I guess quote unquote make the cut or like resonate more with me, like I'll like transcribe those and put them on my website under like a free writing section. So folks can go on there and check it out. spuntoday.com/free writing. But when
now you don't use any kind of text transfer program. You actually type it all back in again.
Yeah, I retype it. But they're not like long, like I'll use like small, like 6x9 notebooks, and there'll be like a page or two where, per like sitting, so it's not like a labor intensive to transcribe it.
Yeah. I definitely miss that. I mean, I definitely miss handwriting things. I just, as a 53-year-old person trying to pump out as many books as I can, all these topics, I don't know. I just don't have time to handwrite so much anymore.
No, yeah, absolutely. You're definitely prolific when it comes to that. Then I also have a process where I used to use Microsoft Word, and sometimes I still do, but I bumped into a program by listening to a writing podcast, the Creative Pen podcast by Joanna Penn. And she was always like speaking about this writing program that doubles up as a writing program, but also as like a formatting. It like helps you like output the formats for the different types of ebooks, and whether it's a Mobi file or like a PDF, and pretty much like an all-in-one tool. It's called Scrivener, and it's really user-friendly. Yeah, it's really user-friendly. I highly recommend it. I have it on the computer, and I also there's like an application on the phone. And sometimes when I have to like take the subway or something to go to work, like I'll write on my phone within the program. Then I'll like come home and I'll finish. It'll be on my computer because it like syncs up pretty seamlessly. And it's just like a really powerful tool in terms of like the formatting to like get it into like ebook format. just like really user friendly in terms of like if you write something and you just want to like move this page, you know, to a different chapter, you can do that, or an excerpt without having to like cut and copy and paste like you would on Microsoft Word, and it's pretty cool.
Sounds like one of those things where you say, "Why didn't I do this sooner?"
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I know that I've only like scratched the surface of like what it's for. Like I just learned how to like type into it and how to like export into like the different formats. But then like I'll see like a 3-hour video on YouTube saying, "Oh, look at all the 101 things that you can do with Scrivener." And I'm like, all right, maybe one day, but for now.
now you've outed yourself as a nerd too.
Yeah.
Watching 3-hour videos about formatting programs.
I guess we can all be nerds once we find, you know, something that we're into, right?
Yes.
So let's see. So you'll mull ideas over, walk on your property, feed the chickens, come back, type into Microsoft Word. What do you do? Do you use professional editing? Do you edit yourself? Do you?
I do all the things I'm not supposed to do. I do my own editing. I do my own book covers. I do my own proofreading. Now, I'll sometimes get friends to help me do some editing, proofreading, because I'll give them advanced copies of things I'm writing on. So I'm not the only one looking at it. But a lot of things I do is I'll let the Word's audio program read it back to me.
Right.
So I can catch things that I normally wouldn't catch when you're reading it. So that helps me a lot. Plus, even though it's they're getting better with their voices, they're not so robotic. So even in that, I can say, well, if somebody, because most of my books turn into audiobooks, so I have an idea of what's going to sound like as an audiobook. And I'm getting better at that as well, because now a lot of times if I'm referring to myself in the book, I no longer say the word I say the author, because I'm expecting eventually an audio person's going to be, a narrator is going to be reading it, so I said the author. I speak to myself in the third person there. So I'm getting better at that because of the fact that I have to let it read it back. So yeah, so I do all the formatting and the editing and the book covering and everything else myself. Right now, at least.
I did that with my first book, Make Wig for You. Just like you said, I wrote it, edited it, formatted it, created like the cover on like Canva, I think was the website I used, and just a very simple cover, just like block text and like a border. And then for the second book, same thing. I wrote and edited myself. I actually listened to a really good podcast called. The name's escaping me right now, but it's by an editor named Sean Coyne. He edited Stephen Pressfield's books, and he has a podcast with another author, and he has like 20 years of like editing experience, and he pretty much like broke down like his process for editing. So I was just like listening to that and trying to like take like gems from there and like edit the book myself. But that second time around for my novel FRACTAL. For that, I got professional cover design done, and I used a service called 99 Designs, which is pretty cool. And then my goal is for the third book, then to try. All right, I tried doing everything myself from A to Z. Second book, I got the cover professionally done and did everything else myself. And for the third one, I want to try getting like professional editing, just to like be able to like compare firsthand like all the difference in those experiences.
Now, has the results for you have been any different or no? Because, I mean, you'll have some people, before you answer my question, some people will swear that if you don't do it all so-called professionally, that you'll never get anywhere. You'll never sell anything. It'll look like garbage, blah, blah, blah. You'll have all kinds of errors in your book. Your cover will look awful, blah, blah, blah. So knowing this and understanding this and having done it multiple ways, has there been different results based on these different ways or no?
I think it's tough. Well, my on instinct, I want to say no, not yet. Not with just the difference in like the cover. Although, like for me, like it definitely looks different. It looks more professional, but it's like tough to compare those two books because they're both, one's a time travel fiction novel and the other one's like a motivational nonfiction book. So it's right. From a selling perspective, it's not comparing apples to apples, but I definitely liked the process of like using like the 99 design service and stuff like that. But I have heard, like you said, like the same things. If you don't get professional editing, you're like doing it wrong. But I'm like when it comes to that, hard-headed kind of, I want to learn that for myself.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So which is why, and I figured if I start off with the first book and get professional editing, then I'm not going to go back to like not do it. So let me start off with the first book. do everything myself and then
for me,
build myself up.
For me, the whole process, the book writing, the whole process to me is art. I don't really consider myself an author so much as I'm an artist. So not only is every word I put in the book, the way they're putting the book, how I end the book, the way it's structured, the cover, everything is my artwork. It's mine, and I want to own it. And if simply, well, I'm not going to buy that. That's crap. Okay, well, I guess I would like to sell the books, but ultimately, artists don't paint paintings to necessarily make money. They paint them because they have to express themselves. And so I have to express myself, and I'm going to express it through writing books. And if people end up buying them, that's great.
Absolutely. That's awesome. I love hearing that. And it's true. Like nobody becomes a writer to make money. Like it's not
right.
It's not the, plan A for like making money for anyone. It's always like a passion project type of thing. And if the byproduct, if a byproduct of it happens to be making money, then of course that'll be amazing. But because of the fact that it'll help facilitate, removing the need to, work for money off the table, which enables you to be able to write more and do more of what you love. That's the way.
Well, as soon as I write my next book, it's going to be half-naked zombie women from Mars. I will definitely make it big, and I will make lots of money, I'm sure.
And throw in a couple vampires and some
and some
glitter.
Yes, there we go.
All right, so you self-publish, and you, like you mentioned, you have a lot of different formats. You have like all digital formats. You have audiobooks. You have, I believe I saw on your website, you have hardcover and
actually, I was able to get into the hardcover. Amazon was betaing their hardcover potentialities there for a while, and since I'd published, or at that time, I think I'd published 9 or 10 books already. So they came to me and said, hey, along with other authors, I'm sure, and said, hey, we're not putting this out for release yet, but we want to have a select few authors here, see if they want to put their books in hardcover. So I just make it available in all formats because some people don't, they like the hardcovers. They don't want this flimsy paper, so they'll buy in hardcover. So
absolutely,
it's available in print and audiobook on hardcover and an ebook. And I'm even trying to figure out what could be the next thing. I'm thinking about how we can get YouTube books or something. I don't know. I'm trying to think about how to improve books. So.
Like some sort of video immersive like experience.
Right, which kind of, leads me to this book called Bandersnatch Jesus I wrote. I don't know if you see that on the website. So it might be a little before your time because I think it was in the 80s. There was these choose your own adventure books. I think that may be a trademark term, so I'm noting that here. But anyhow, choose your own adventure books. You get in, you open your book up, and
I remember
you read so much. Yeah, and you go to a certain page and that certain outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Not to cut you off, but my brother, I have a brother who's 5 years older than me, and I remember I don't know if he like had to read them as part of school or he was just into those books, but I remember it would say, if you want to go through the door, go to page 49. If you want to go back home, go to page 72.
Exactly. So that's what Bandersnatch Jesus is.
Gotcha.
But it's based on Bible stories that if you choose what the Bible actually says, it'll follow along just like the Bible. But I purposely put some things in there real strange that you might say, well, what happens if instead of Jesus hanging on the cross or giving in to the Romans, his disciples fought back and kept him from being? There's things like that in there. So you choose these different alternatives, and the book leads you different ways. And it's just a little interesting concept because normally those kind of books are only fiction. So I was like, okay, let's put it on something a little more serious and see what it does. So it's out there. I don't know what people think of it. So there's also that movie called Bandersnatch.
It's a cool
Bandersnatch, I think. Have you seen that one on Netflix?
On Netflix, yeah.
I
actually saw it.
Yeah, so
it was pretty cool.
And I think they got sued because again, the trademark term is choose your own adventure. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I didn't know you could trademark entire phrases, but whatever.
Yeah, I know. And I wanted to circle back to your fiction. You have your first fiction called Clipbook Time Finder, and I heard a little bit of how this book came about, and I definitely wanted to ask you about it because my debut novel, Fractal, is also a time travel story, which I believe Clipbook Time Finder is. And I was really fascinated by how you mentioned that it I don't want to, spoil you telling
you can give it away.
Okay. It was
You can give it away. It's fine.
basically someone finding like an old book of clippings somewhere, and you wound up stumbling upon it, or they gave it to you, and you used that to create the story.
Yeah, so it's the first in the hopefully at least 3 books in a series. I'm working on the second one now. But the reason I said Clipbook Time Finders is I had this real life gentleman that liked to read my books. He said, "Hey, I've had this book of this like a scrapbook that I found back in the 1970s on top of a trash can." He says, "It's just full of a bunch of paper clippings and weird stuff that don't seem to be connected. Can I send it to you? You can kind of figure out what's going on, maybe turn it into something." So he sent it to me, and I was looking through it. There's no cohesive story in the book. It's just all these clippings, some of them back all the way to the 1800s. From actual newspapers and stuff.
And are they just like news stories, or like pieces of stories, or like?
No, there's stories, and there's just sayings and ads and just weird stuff in there. I couldn't figure out what's going on. There's even a diploma in there, an actual diploma. So finally, after I looked at the entire book, I found out that there's a guy from the 1800s in there, and then maybe one of his relatives with a diploma from the 1978 era. I still don't know exactly how they're all connected because it doesn't make any sense. So I'm thinking, you know what? It'd be interesting if this was I'll go ahead and reveal the premise of the book. This cookbook was a way for a time traveler to remember where he is. Because usually when time traveling books or stories or movies or whatever, there's always some kind of machine you go into and you dial in the actual date and there you go and you're off. Instead, in my premise, there's just crystals, and the person has to have this special book with them that has little bits of their life and important things that they've written in here and kept clippings and things like that, whatever sayings they remember and childhood pictures and stuff like that. Because the process of going through time makes you begin to forget who you really are. You start absorbing into the time that you go to. And so if you don't have this clipbook with you to look through and go, oh, yeah, that's who I am, you'll eventually forget who you are, and you'll just settle in that time and never even try to go anywhere else.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
So that's the whole concept of the book. And so I try to put, what's even more interesting, I try to put real life places in there. I mean, the place that he goes to, the El Capitan Hotel in California, actually exists. You could actually go there.
Nice.
And various places like that in the book are in there. So if somebody's reading it, I want them to believe that, is this possible? Is this guy really, maybe this guy really is a time traveler.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I want somebody to come away with reading it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Some conspiracy theorist or something.
Yeah. I definitely like that about.
Come back to haunt me in the future.
Yeah, I like playing with that genre of time travel, and I also didn't want to make it like a machine or a car, like Back to the Future-ish. Even though I love Back to the Future, I think it's the best 80s trilogy out there. But I didn't want it to be like a physical thing that you had to like go into. So in my story, it happens through dreams, and it's kind of like, I guess, like a mix between like The Matrix meets Back to the Future sort of thing. It's like a group of folks that are in the know that this time travel or this ability to time travel exists. And most people have the ability within them, but it's like dormant within them. And some of them, they can live their entire lives and never know that they had it. Some of them can have, and they travel like through their dreams. And some of them have dreams, and things wind up happening in their dreams, and then it changes in like their real time reality based on what they did in the dreams. But it could be subtle things that they never notice, and some folks realize that they do have the ability, and then manipulate it and try to use it for personal gain, etc. So then you have like this underbelly of folks that try to take advantage of that, and folks that try to like just correct injustices of the past, and then they use certain like pills to like fall asleep and dream for longer periods of time, and like go on actual missions and things like that. And that's the route that I took.
Yeah, I love that. That's definitely different. And I think that's how I originally contacted you. I think I had seen something you've written your time travel book. I was like, hey, well, here's somebody else writing stuff like this. So
oh, nice.
Let's see if we can.
I was actually going to ask you that too, if how you heard of about the podcast. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I was looking up time travel and seeing what's going on, and I come across your book. I said, "Here's a guy, and he's actually doing podcasts too. Let's get with him. And he's actually a writer as well, and it'll be great." So I think that's how it came about.
Nice, that's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely been a great conversation. And before we wrap up, I want to ask you about a couple things, if you don't mind. You mentioned podcasting, that you were doing some like weird text earlier version of podcasting back in like the 90s. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in the early 1990s, before the internet existed, there were these things called college message boards, and then these other things called MOOs and MUDs, which stand for, if I remember right, multiple object-oriented environments. And so all it was is basically text on the screen, and you'd have to wait for your 24-baud modem to catch up with you. You know, that noise for a long time ago. And you type, and you're talking to people all over the world. So it was really interesting. But sometimes you had to wait for them to respond, 20 seconds. And there would be environments that you create that were all text-based. That said, if you want to go east, type E. If you want to go west, type W. And that's really all there was. There was no pictures or anything like that. And so that's what I was on first. And then as soon as the internet started coming in, we all swore we're never, we're still going to stay here. We're not going to leave the Moo. We love these people. But eventually all the hype of pictures and everything else and the podcasting, doing a podcast, it was a religious podcast for the most part. But I probably had over 300 shows at some point. I think most of them are gone now. But I was a podcaster when it first came out, really. So
that's pretty cool. Did you didn't like back up like any of the the audio or anything like that? I was gonna say it would be pretty cool to like re-release.
There's probably some still floating out there, but no. I mean, this is almost, again, 1990, so this is almost 30 years ago, right? Some longer than that. So I've had multiple computers since then.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't laptops back then. There was all these clunky desktops, and I don't have one of those anymore. So
right. And one of the last things I wanted to ask you about was the Renfest that you told me about. When you mentioned, we were supposed to have the conversation last week, and you mentioned that you were going to be at Renfest. And honestly, I didn't know what you meant. I didn't know what it was. I was just like, okay, cool, have fun. And then I Googled Renfest, and I saw it's for folks listening, from what I gathered, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, it's like those like World War II reenactment type of deals. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, but for medieval times, knights and princesses and stuff like that. My interest in it is, I found out from my heritage. Now we're circling back to the beginning of the podcast. My heritage is my father, my biological father, came directly from Germany in 1952 on a ship. At age 8, I think he was, somewhere on there. And I found out that my heritage is directly into Teutonic Viking.
Wow.
So, I mean, really close. So we're interested in going to these Renfest, these fairs, these reenactments, so we can participate in our Viking heritage, and possibly even we dressed up a little bit, but we eventually want to dress up in full garb and maybe even make a business out of it where we make Viking swords, wooden ones and things like that, various things for that. So we have an interest in this. And when I was there, you didn't call me out, so I'll call myself out. So I was supposed to come on the show like last week or so, I think it was. And in my life, I've only been drunk twice, and last week was one of them. The reason I haven't been drunk a lot in my life is because my adoptive family were a lot of alcoholics, and I tried to avoid that because I've seen the results of that. Not putting anybody else down, but I just know for myself I didn't want any of that. I didn't want to actually get into it by accident. So what happens is the Viking alcohol is called mead, meade, and it's made out of honey, just honey and water. It's fermented honey, basically. And whereas a typical beer is 4% alcohol, mead is 14.7% alcohol, and it's very sweet most of the time, and hard to even realize you're drinking alcohol. It's very tasty, and I love honey anyhow. So before I knew it, I think we'd gone through 4 or 5 6-ounce cups of this 14.7% alcohol. And even though I found out I'm not a hostile drunk and I don't really slur my words, I just wouldn't have been as coherent. You would have said something, I would have said, well, what did you say?
Yeah.
So I thought it best to not expose the audience to me being slightly inebriated. So that's what happened.
Good call, because this definitely turned out to be a cool conversation. That probably would have been made for an interesting one as well, but...
Well, maybe we'll do another one where hey Tony, I've had a lot of mead. Let's make a show.
Let's talk about my new book.
I didn't write a book yet, but if I ever do, it's going to be this.
Yeah. Welcome to the wonderful world of mead.
Yeah.
All right, Roderick. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on. Wanted you to...
I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. You have an open invitation definitely to come back on. Mention to folks your website again and your Twitter where folks can find you and any books you want to plug or promote. And obviously I'll link to everything in the episode notes as well. Yeah,
as you said, it was roderick.com, or you can just go to Amazon and look for Roderick Edwards. I think all the books will come up there, or Google it. If there's anything about, outstanding warrants, that might not be me. It's probably somebody else. But anyhow, just follow me there and please to pick up a book. I always give away a lot of audio books. So if you say, hey, I like this book, but I don't have much money or I don't want to spend, I'd be more than happy to send you the PDF. Because right now at this stage, I just want people to read and see what they think and give me feedback.
Awesome. Well, Roderick, thanks again, buddy.
Thank you. Take care and have a good night. And
thanks a lot, buddy.
All right. Have a good night, and we'll listen to the podcast soon together.
Absolutely. How cool was that conversation, folks? A really cool writing takeaway that I'm going to borrow from Roderick is something that he mentioned during the episode, which was having the audio program within Word read back your writing to you. I personally use Scrivener, like I mentioned on the episode, but I believe Scrivener also has like a dictate function. But if not, then, and for folks listening, if you use a different writing program, you can just copy and paste like scene, do like a scene per scene or chapter per chapter, or maybe just a few paragraphs that you want to just hear back spoken to you, as opposed to just you hearing it in your own head. Like a good writing tip, aside from that, is just like reading things out loud, especially dialogue as you write them, just so you can hear how it actually sounds spoken out loud. Because when you just read in your head, things can come off a certain way. But I definitely like that idea of using that dictate function within Word. And I'm definitely going to borrow that from you, Roderick. Thank you very much for sharing. And thanks again, Roderick, for taking the time to come on the Spun Today podcast. I really appreciated it. It was a great conversation. You have an open invitation to come back on the show. Fellow writers out there listening, please feel free to reach out, hit me up if you ever want to come on the Spun Today podcast. And you don't have to only be a writer, pretty open to speak to anyone, especially within the creative vein. And as I mentioned before, folks, Roderick can be found on Twitter at roderick.com, spelled out on Twitter. His website is roderick.com, roderick.com. And all his books can be found in many different formats, digital for your e-readers, audiobooks, paperback copies, and hardback copies as well on Amazon. You can just Google his name, Roderick Edwards, or check out any of the links within the episode notes of this episode. And that, folks, once again, was episode 196 of the Spun Today podcast. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz. I hope you enjoyed that one. I sure did. And if you want to help me free up some time to create more content, to record more episodes, to write more books, please stick around to listen to a few different ways that you can help support the Spun Today podcast if you so choose. Peace. What's up, folks? Tony here. I hope you're enjoying this podcast as much as I enjoy producing it for you. Here are a few quick ways you can help support this show. You can support the Spun Today podcast by going to spuntoday.com/support. There, you'll find my merch section, where you can cop the iconic Podcasts vs. Anybody t-shirt in a wide variety of different colors and all different sizes. Also, if you're into cycling, you can cop the super soft, comfortable, minimalist design Spun Today Bike Club t-shirt. Also available in a bunch of different colors in all different sizes. There are a few other designs of different types of t-shirts. Definitely go there and check it out. spuntoday.com/support. It's the merch section, where you can also get a dope coffee mug. I have coffee mugs with the brand new redesigned Spun Today logo on one side and the tagline that I end every show with on the other, which is start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. The mug is available in both black and white, because we don't discriminate here at the Spun Today podcast. Again, go to spuntoday.com/support and check out the merch section. You can support the Spun Today podcast by checking out my writing. You can go to spuntoday.com/free writing and check out some of my free association writing, which is intended to be some cathartic free writing, but oftentimes doubles down as motivation for myself and others. At spuntoday.com/short stories, you can read a bunch of the different short stories that I've written and actually listen to the audiobook versions of those short stories there as well. Another way you can help support my writing is by going to spuntoday.com/books and checking out what I have in store for sale. Digital copies are available in all formats, whether it be Kindle, iBooks, or a different type of e-reader. You can also purchase paperback copies if that's your preferred reading method. Currently available, I have my nonfiction, Make Way for You, which is a collection of freely written thoughts that were curated and put together as tips for getting out of your own way. Also available is my debut time travel novel titled FRACTAL. Again, go to spuntoday.com/books to show your support. Support the Spun Today podcast by following me on social at Spun Today on Twitter, at Spun Today on Instagram. Please also check out and like my Facebook page, facebook.com/Spun Today, and subscribe to my YouTube page as well. On my YouTube page, not only will you get these full-length episodes, but you'll also get to check out some chopped up clips and bonus content. To get to my YouTube page, just search Spun Today on YouTube or click on any of the YouTube icons on the footer of my website. Also, don't forget to rate and review this podcast wherever it is that you're listening. It really does help. The Spun Today newsletter is available to each and every one of my listeners absolutely for free. All you have to do is go to spuntoday.com/subscribe and drop in your email address. What I'm going to do is brighten up everybody's least favorite day of the week by delivering 5 curated things within my weekly newsletter every Monday at noon. You're going to receive a photo of the week, a recommended podcast of the week. I listen to tons of podcasts from an array of varied interests. I cherry pick the very best ones so that you can check them out. I also share a video of the week, which can be anything from a tasty recipe to a dope rap battle to an enlightening TED Talk. I also share a quote of the week. And finally, for my fellow wordsmiths out there, a word of the week so that you can step up your vocab. Again, this curated list is yours absolutely free by going to spuntoday.com/subscribe and dropping in your email address, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Again, go to spuntoday.com/subscribe, drop in your email address, and you'll get the very next one. If you want to help support the Spun Today podcast financially, you can do so by going to spuntoday.com/support. Here you'll find a few different ways that you can do so. You can shop on Amazon, but first go to my website, spuntoday.com/support, click on the Amazon banner, which will take you to Amazon's website where you do your shopping like you normally do. It will not cost you anything extra, but I will get credit for driving traffic to their website. Another cool way that you can help support this show is through Patreon, where you can set up reoccurring donations to my podcast, whether it be $1 per show, $2 per show, etc. And depending on how much you choose to pledge, you will receive some Patreon perks in return. Things like free writing pieces, free bookmarks, free digital copies of my books, etc. Again, my Patreon link can be found at spuntoday.com/support. You can also set up similar reoccurring payments via my Ko-fi page. And if you want to send a one-time happiness bomb donation, if you will, you can do so via my PayPal link. Again, all of which can be found at spuntoday.com/support. If you're a fellow creative, a cool way that you can help support the Spun Today podcast and actually be part of the podcast is by filling out my 5-question questionnaire located at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Here you'll find 5 open questions related to your craft, your art, what inspires you to create, what type of unrelated hobbies you're into, and what motivates you to get your work done. You can choose to remain anonymous or plug your website and your work. And once you submit your questionnaire, I read your responses on a future episode of the Spun Today podcast. It's completely free at no cost to you. And what I like to say about it is that if your responses could potentially spark inspiration in someone else, why not share that? spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.